Hello everyone, Pastor Brent here, and once again, Hannah behind the camera. It is Thursday, no, it is Wednesday. It is Wednesday, June 22nd, but it's not really, because you know that if everything went well and the plane didn't crash into the mountain, or worse, in the middle of Saskatchewan, because nobody wants to be in the middle of Saskatchewan. You know I'm out west, but Hannah and I are working hard to make sure that you are biblically well educated, and we have Bible study for you, of course, Wednesday night, June 22nd. Just a reminder, there is no in-person Bible study Thursday. Pass that on to family, friends, and relatives. Again, because I'm out west with a good portion of my family. Hopefully that works out well. Living in close quarters with your family for 9 or 10 days, there is some risk to that. So pray for us, not just for good weather. You know, one thing you could pray for just before we get to the serious stuff? My daughter desperately wants to see a whale. We are going whale watching. So could you pray, if this isn't too corny, that my daughter sees a whale? Because if she doesn't see a whale, I think the whole trip is going to be kind of like, nah. So anyways, we want to see a whale from inside the boat. That would be another key thing too. We want to be dry while we see the whale. Anyways, I can tell that you're ready to go. Let's pray and we'll get into it. Father, today we thank you that we have an opportunity to share the Word of God. It is a privilege to do so. We are dealing with some interesting passages of Scripture again today. So help me to teach them, exegete them, explain them well and wisely. We continue to pray for the faith of the church family, that it would be strong, Lord, that it would be bold, that we would be excited to serve you and to make you known. I pray, God, for the cares that we carry today, that you would remind us, your word says this, to cast all of our cares upon you because you care for us. And so help us to actually do that. Not just to kind of do it for a second, but understand that there are things that we can do, things that we can't do, and things that we shouldn't do. And help us to leave all of that stuff with Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. So last week we finished in verse 17, and we finished what I thought was a good study on husbands loving their wives, praying for their wives, being considerate of their wives. Talk to you about not being unequally yoked, not being married to an unsaved person. Again, the vast majority of you that are watching are married. That issue's already been settled. But if you're not married, or you're thinking of remarrying, you're maybe a widow or a widower, that you make sure that you marry someone that loves Jesus. That's just absolutely critically important. And then I spent a long time talking about sharing your faith. And I asked some of you last week if you wouldn't mind emailing me with some of your latest stories of having an opportunity to share your faith. I'm in the middle right now of conversing with someone who has lost a spouse. They're grieving. They have lots of questions about heaven and hell and eternity. And so I'm in process there. We're just kind of inching along in our conversation so far, hoping to have a bigger, more meaningful conversation somewhere in the not too distant future. But I'm keeping in contact with this person, and that's moving along. It's good. I'm happy to offer some consolation to this person. And I'm happy that in the midst of offering consolation to that person, that I can speak to them about the Lord and the hope that we have in Jesus Christ, which is the ultimate consolation, right? Jesus is our hope. And so I'm trying to be obedient to that as well. I wish I was more intentional about that. If I have one lament about that is that I don't have as many opportunities as I'd like to. I have a feeling that when those opportunities, those one-on-one opportunities to share my faith are there, I feel like God is with me and I do a good job with that. I just wish there were more. And so I'm just, I'm like you, I'm thinking about this and praying about this, and hey, God, help me to be more sensitive to perhaps more opportunities, or help me to be bold to maybe create more opportunities to share my faith in a wise way. But I hope I can hear from some of you about that, just a little bit of how I'm going through that and working through that and looking forward to that as I'm in process with someone right now. Just so you know, confidentiality-wise, that person is not known to anybody here in the church. Not a church family member, not related to anybody here. It's just one of those God things that happen. So just so you know, lots of confidentiality there. And so we're in 1 Peter chapter 3, and I'm going to begin reading, I believe, in verse 18 today. Your notes should be there. Even though I'm out west at this very moment in time, for you at least, I sent the notes via email on a delivery system that would have had them sent out. So you should have those. If something happens with the email or the electronics or technology and you don't get them, let me apologize for that right now, because there'll be nothing I can do from where I am. But hopefully all the technology works out. 1 Peter 3 verse 18, for Christ died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. That's why he died, to bring you to God. Wow, awesome. He was put to death in the body, but made alive by the Spirit, through whom also he went and preached to the spirits in prison who disobeyed long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it, only a few people, 8 in all, Noah's family, were saved through water, and this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also, not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a good conscience towards God. How does baptism save us? It's not just by being baptized. It goes on to say it saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. So, this is one of those passages, folks, that has an interesting verse in it. If it wasn't for this verse or a couple of verses, it would be just a typical Bible passage. But when we start talking about, through whom also he, meaning Jesus, went and preached to the spirits in prison, just so you know, I'm reading from the NIV 1984. That word preached is better translated proclaimed. And the 2011 version of the NIV does a better job with that. It translates it translates from the proper Greek word, which isn't, the word to evangelize. It's a different kind of a word in the Greek, which just means to share or proclaim, state, voice. And so it's better. So also he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison who disobeyed long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah's ark. So that is an interesting verse. We're going to get to that. If you've read that in 1 Peter before, you would say, hey, does that mean that like Jesus went back to, to the generation of Noah and proclaimed the gospel of Jesus Christ? Does that mean that Jesus, the spirits, does that mean like, is that the fallen angels of that time, the Nephilim and that mess in Genesis 6? What's that talking about? We read again in 1 Peter 4 verse 6, for this reason the gospel was preached to even those who are now dead. What does that mean? Does that mean that Jesus went and preached to those that had already died? Or does it mean something else? So I'm going to work through all of these verses so you have a clear understanding of what's going on here, so that you will understand it and not get sidetracked by some of these perhaps puzzling verses. I hope to share with you in such a way that they are not puzzling and that we stay on topic. So first of all, let me do my customary welcome. Welcome to everyone that is here with us today on this June 22nd. Wink, wink, nod, nod. And let me put my little smiley face in there. And let's just remember the theme that we're dealing with here. The theme that we're dealing with in 1 Peter is really still the idea of suffering, and more particularly, suffering for Christ as Christ suffered for us. And the whole idea of that suffering, Jesus dying on the cross and all of those good things, happens to us in verse 18. What was the purpose of that? Purpose of all that was to bring us to God. Make it possible to be saved. Provide an atonement for our sins. So that's the theme. And the reason why I'm sharing that with you off the bat is so that when we do deal with some of these, I call them obscure. It's probably not obscure in the way that we're not familiar with them, but the truth maybe is a little obscure, hard to find what they're trying to say. I don't want us to get sidetracked into those things. I want us to remember what the theme is, what Peter is talking about, what the goal is. You will have your notes. I've got them there already prepared, of course. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18, 4 to 6. I've read to you, some of that already. But we'll probably pick it up and read just a little bit more down the road. But, you can see there that there's some interesting things to talk about. So again, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18. Let's begin on that verse. For Christ died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. So that's why Jesus came. That's why Jesus died on the cross. That's why he shed his blood. And the Bible tells us that he did that once for all. That there was one time that happened, 2,000 years ago, that happened in Gethsemane. And that was the once and for all. And one died. And one died for all. So that's really important for us to remember in verse 18. We do not re-crucify Christ in our communion ceremonies, in our taking of the bread and the juice. The Bible says it is better, if it is God's will, to suffer for doing good than for evil. For Christ died for sins, for the sins of humankind, once for all, he being the righteous for the unrighteous, for the purpose of bringing us to God. There is no other way to salvation. There's no other way to a home in heaven but through Christ, the righteous who died for the unrighteous. And so that is how it all happens, right? That's the big thing. The point that he is making there, that Jesus suffered in his body in order to achieve that. That's why this idea of suffering is still part of the text and is still the theme. Jesus suffered in his body to make all of this real for us. There is a teaching that's going to begin in the first century or in the early second century that Jesus didn't really have a body, that he just appeared to have a body, that he didn't really suffer and die on the cross. He didn't really shed his blood. It just appeared like that. It is some piece of what they call Gnosticism back in those days, where gnosis in Greek means knowledge, and the whole idea of knowledge is supreme, knowledge is the goal. So they didn't want it to appear like that their Savior was actually crucified as a criminal on a Roman cross and died and shed his blood and all of those kinds of things. It just appeared that way is what the Gnostics were saying. But the Bible makes it very clear to us. For Christ died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body. Put to death in the body. Very important. He had a real body, was fully God and fully human. He had a real body. He just didn't appear like he had a body. He had a real body, and that body suffered. He suffered. He suffered physically. He suffered emotionally. He suffered mentally. There was the crying out of his spirit, quoting scripture when all of this was happening to him. He was put to death in the body, but made alive by the Spirit, right? We know that. That same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead dwell in you, right? You live as well. And that same Spirit does dwell in us as Christ followers. Yes, one day we will put this body aside. The body will go into ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. but we will be with Jesus, because to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And so we believe that. But we are alive. We've been made spiritually alive. That which was dead in trespasses and sins, the Bible tells us in Ephesians 2, has now also been made alive. So Christ has been made alive by the Spirit, and so have we who have followed and believed in him. And so you will see that in your notes, Wednesday, June 22nd, 2022, 1 Peter 3:18 verses to chapter 4, verse 6. And again, I hope we get through all of it today. But let's deal with some of these more challenging passages of Scripture. So, but he was made alive by the Spirit, through whom means by that same Spirit, through whom also he, meaning Jesus, went and preached to the spirits in prison who disobeyed long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. So, verses 19 and verse 20 are the passages of Scripture that sometimes sidetrack us a little bit in Peter's discussion of suffering for Christ, like Christ suffered for us, suffering for doing good. And we get to 1 Peter 3, verses 19 and 20, and we run into some questions. So, number one, the Bible tells us that Christ has been made alive by the Spirit, and by that same Spirit, verse 19, through whom, by that same Spirit, through whom, by that same Spirit, Jesus went and proclaimed, again, preached is in the old version, the 1984 version. It doesn't translate the Greek word well. Proclaimed in the 2011 NIV and probably some other versions of your Bible like the ESV is proclaimed there. What did Jesus proclaim? He proclaimed, through whom he also went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison who disobeyed. Who disobeyed long ago. So, we know that it is telling us that by the Spirit of God, by the Spirit of Jesus, that that there was a proclamation to the spirits in prison who disobeyed long ago. And so we ask ourselves, what is Peter trying to tell here? Did Jesus go to a place where Old Covenant, pre-Old Covenant people lived and proclaim some message to them, proclaim or preach the gospel to them? Did Jesus go back and give these people an opportunity to get saved again? And oh, by the way, is it to the spirits? Are they the spirits of people? Oh, are we talking about spirits that equate to angels, perhaps even fallen angels? And these are the two main thoughts, that's what Jesus did. Some think that when Jesus was crucified and he was gone for about 3 days, that he went to the place where pre-Old Testament saints were, the time around Noah, and he proclaimed his victory, over death and sin, and that he went and told these people that he is the Lord and he is the overcomer, he is the victor. So some people think that Jesus went and ministered to the spirits of people that had passed away, probably from the time of Adam and Eve to the time of Noah's Ark when the world was wiped out. Other people believe that, no, when it talks about spirits there, he's talking about fallen angels likely, and that he went to those fallen angels who are in prison, and he proclaimed his victory over sin and the death. And the reason why some people prefer to think about that being fallen angels is if you go to Jude verse 6, it says, "And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but have abandoned their own home, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day." So there seems to be some linkage here with Jude 6, everlasting chains, that there is some kind of imprisonment. Which seems to link up better with 1 Peter 3, verse 19. And so that's what some people think. And they think that, where that might have happened is in Genesis chapter 6. And I hope you can follow me here. These people think that in Genesis chapter 6, it's when this happens. Hang on here. I'm in Exodus chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6. Where it says this about what was going on at that time. When men began to increase in number on the earth, the daughters were born to them, the sons of God, which is often a reference to angels. The sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal, and his days will be 120. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and afterwards, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were heroes of old, men of renown." And the Bible, so these people think that Jesus, during the time before he was resurrected, went back to where these angels are in prison, and he proclaimed his victory over them, and then, eventually ascend. So that's what some people think. And it's, it's difficult to say, perhaps, if this one of these two answers, suffice as to what it's saying. Is it possible that there's a third explanation to this? So let me tell you what I think. I'm giving you the two main theories. One, that between Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, he went back to the pre-Old Covenant people who are dead and are in the abyss or in Sheol or in the grave, but their spirits are alive, and he shared with them his victory over the cross. Some people believe that he went to where the fallen angels are in prison, and declared his victory through the cross. And so those are the two main thoughts. Again, I just want to do my best not to cause confusion and just to give you, my best run at it. This is how I understand it. It says, "He was put to death in the body, but made alive by the Spirit, through whom also he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, who disobeyed long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah." So what do we know for a fact without speculation? We know that the Bible says that Jesus, by the Spirit, because it says he was made alive by the Spirit, and then it says, verse 19, through whom he, meaning Jesus, also went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. So it says spirits in prison. About the only other time that it mentions spirits in prison or spirits in chains is in Jude 6. And there it is absolutely making reference to fallen angels, those that have disobeyed. And because it talks about Noah's generation, I think there can be good linkage to the events of Genesis 6 that talk about the sin of Noah's generation, which was the sons of God went down to be with the daughters of men, and obviously, something heinous and uncommonly happens there. Angels and humans mixing. And I know people say, well, how is that possible? How could that be? But boy, it sure seems to indicate that that's what happened. I don't think we can say the sons of God were, the righteous line of Seth, or a more righteous people that all of a sudden abandoned their righteousness and started to have, relationships with, quote, the daughters of men. I think the sons of God is a reference to these are angelic beings. The daughters of men is a reference to the fact that they are human beings. And somehow or another, there is copulation here and there is an unholy offspring. And so because of that, I think that God, in his wiping out of the planet at that time, except for the 8 that are saved, and also that fallen angels are put into prison at that time, that some spiritual warfare takes place and they are put in everlasting chains, waiting for the final judgment. So I think that this is what is being said here, that by the Spirit, or through the Spirit, that Jesus went and proclaimed, his victory, through his death and his burial and eventually his resurrection, to those spirits which are in prison. And those spirits which are in prison, I don't believe are the spirits of people, but they are the spirits of fallen angels, who disobeyed long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built, right? So I think the prison thing makes me think it's more angelic beings than human beings, but it talks about, those who disobeyed long ago, and those who disobeyed were also the people on the planet. So, are the people on the planet that disobeyed long ago, do we ever see them as being, quote, in prison? Possibly. They're in the abyss. They're in the waiting place, waiting for final judgment. The Hebrews later on call it Sheol, or a place of waiting. We know that eventually Jesus tells us the story about, Abraham's bosom, where there was a good place that, the righteous waited, and there was a bad place where the unrighteous waited. And saying all that, I am saying this, that the spirits there, possibly could be fallen angels. The spirits there could possibly just all of those that have disobeyed. But when it talks about imprisonment and in chains, it often refers to angels. Spirits often, again, there is the spirit of men, there is the spirit of people. Spirits here could represent just, what was left of, men and women who disobeyed long ago. And it's talking about their spirit being. So, even though I tend to lean towards there's this proclamation to the fallen angels and to Jesus' victory over sin through the cross, I can see very much how other people could see it, that perhaps, this has something to do with just the spirits of people that have now been separated from their bodies because of death. There are good arguments for that. I don't follow this argument where it says that, Jesus was made alive by the Spirit, verse 18, through whom he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. That representation there is, by some, if there's this third version, is that the Spirit of Christ, was in Noah at that time, and Noah tried to reach his generation and people disobeyed. I don't think that's what it's saying, because it's, the Spirit's in prison. So, there is some proclamation by Jesus to the spirits in prison, whether they be fallen angels or people that are now just separated from their bodies but are awaiting final judgment. I don't think it's talking about there that, 6,000 years ago, the Spirit of Christ was living in Noah, and that is how he was proclaiming the gospel. I think that one might be just a little further out. But you'll see here that I have some notes with me, some cheat sheets, some notes. And again, generally people fall in one of these two areas, that Jesus preached to the spirits of disembodied people, or he preached to the spirits, meaning the fallen angels, and there's some connection there with Jude chapter 6 as well, the angels, the fallen angels that are in everlasting chains. Regardless of whether it's fallen angels or just disembodied spirits from people, waiting final judgment, Jesus makes a proclamation of his victory. What do you proclaim? You proclaim victory. you announce victory. And Jesus is doing that. And the timing for this may well have been that time while he is, quote, the body is in the grave, but Jesus is actively doing something through the power of the Holy Spirit. There's another connection to that in Ephesians 4, verse 8, where it talks about Jesus leads captivity free. Again, some scholars believe that that's Jesus leading Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and David and Ruth and all of the Old Covenant saints, to their proper place with him in heaven now, that they are now gone from Abraham's bosom and that they have now ascended with Jesus. And some people think that that's what Ephesians 4 and 8 is talking about. But the activity always seems to be tied to the time between his death and his resurrection. And you have to remember, right, that Jesus did say to the one thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise." So this idea of leading captivity free, Old Covenant saints free, taking them to heaven, fits very well with his statement to the thief on the cross, "Today," not sometime down the road, but "today you will be with me in heaven." So I think there's some linkage there. This is up for grabs. You can land where you want on that. And I tend to lean a little bit more to the fallen angels because of the cross reference in Jude 6. But I say that with all humility because I don't know if that's right. But Jesus absolutely made a proclamation of his victory. The Bible tells us in verse 20, and in it only a few people ate and all were saved, meaning Noah's family, and the water, because the water is what carried them away in the ark, right? This water symbolizes, Peter's very careful that this is symbolism, this water that they floated away on, that they were saved by, this water that came down and this water that came up that washed the earth clean of sin. This water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also. Is Peter saying that baptism saves you? Is the Roman Catholic Church right? Is the Presbyterian Church right? Is the Anglican Church right? Is the Lutheran Church right? Baptism saves you? Well, let's keep reading. And this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you. Also, not the removal of dirt from the body, which, is a Jewish custom to wash yourself to be clean of the dirt, but the pledge of a good conscience towards God. Again, still with the same thought, this water, it saves you, means this water, it saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So the water symbolizes our salvation, but we are saved because Jesus conquered sin, death, and the grave, and he rose from the dead. And because we have believed in Jesus as the one that has risen from the dead and has conquered sin, that is what saves us. Baptism is a sign of that, is an example of that. And so that's all Peter is saying. He is not teaching us that baptism saves us. He says that baptism is a sign, is a symbol, it's a type of our salvation. As water saved and washed clean Noah's family, so baptism is a symbol of the sin that has been removed from us, and it has been removed from us because Jesus died once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring us to God. And we know the proof of that because of his resurrection, that Jesus was raised from the dead. And so that is all that he is saying here for us. And so don't be bothered by the fact that you think that verse is telling us water baptism doesn't save us. It just points to what really saves us and how we're saved. So first controversial thing is, who did Jesus proclaim to? Spirits of people or fallen angels? Second controversial thing that we deal with is that we are not saved by water baptism, but water baptism points to how we are saved, which is through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And you will see that in your notes. On the first page of Wednesday, June 22nd, I deal extensively with verse 19. And then as you flip it over, I begin to deal with the water baptism. So let me just put some notes on here. Water baptism symbolizes our salvation. Not the removal of dirt, like in Jewish customs, but a good conscience. Meaning clean on the inside, not just the outside. It's a symbol, as it says there in the symbolism is verse 21. Verse 21 there, 1 Peter 3. And it is all possible through the resurrection. Through the resurrection is what Peter is teaching us there. It saves you, verse 21, it saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who was gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God. Gone into heaven is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. With angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. So water baptism symbolizes our salvation. It's not external. It's not external. It is clean on the inside, a good conscience. How is that possible? It is possible through the death, burial, and particularly Peter focuses on the resurrection. At the very end, it says that he has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, right? That's his place of authority, his position at the right hand of the Father. With what? With angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. That's another reason why, verse 22, I think it is, verse 22 is another reason why I think that this, those that were proclaimed to the spirits in prison, that's another reason why I think that it's talking about fallen angels there and not people. That he touches on it when Jesus went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison who disobeyed long ago. And the reason why I think that that's fallen angels is because at the very end of this chapter, he refers to fallen angels with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. Now, you might say, well, it says angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. It doesn't say fallen angels, it just says angels. That's true. I agree with that. But it also says authorities and powers in submission to him. The whole idea is what he is talking about here is the spiritual hierarchy. He's not talking about the human hierarchy. He's not talking about kings and governors and people being in submission to him, although he could have said that because that's true. Every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. But he says angels, authorities, powers in submission to him. Now, when else does he say that? Where else does the New Testament utilize the thoughts of angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him? And I would suggest to you that other place that we're all very familiar with, that authorities and powers are referred to, is in Ephesians chapter 6. Look at Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, right? It's not against humans, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Now, I realize Ephesians 6 is Paul's writing, and I realize 1 Peter 4:22 is Peter's writing, but they use similar languages, similar words, right? They use similar words. Rulers, authorities, powers of this dark world, against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So I think that he comes back to that in verse 22 because it's those same forces that he proclaimed his victory to in verse 19. And that is just a reminder that Jesus is victor over sin, death, and the grave. And Jesus is victor over all of the dark forces and powers of this world, all of the spiritual forces. We used to say when we had quoted this verse in the King James, principalities and powers and wickedness in high places. But again, the whole idea of here generally is that in Ephesians 6, they are seen as negative spiritual forces, wicked spiritual forces, evil spiritual forces. And that could also be understood, at least in some of this, with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. Meaning the whole hierarchy of spiritual forces. Good angels, bad angels, spiritual powers, authorities, that they are all submitted to him. Why? because he conquered sin, death, and the grave. He was raised to life by the power of God. He lives by the Spirit of God. He is King of kings and Lord of lords, and his resurrection from among the dead, which saves you, proves that. So that's why I lean to that he proclaimed to the spirits, and that I think that's evil fallen angels, and I parcel that up here with verse 22, and I connect that again with Jude 6, that maybe they're all talking about the same thing. Again, in all humility, understanding that I know that there are all kinds of other people and other theologians that think, well, maybe that's just a reference to those that died in the flood, that Jesus went and proclaimed his victory to them. And I know some people think that that's the way, but that's not how I lean. That's not how I lean. But at the same time, I am aware that there are other opinions, and you might have another opinion about that. Again, pastor@essexgospel.com. No point putting it in the chat line this week, folks, because I'm not going to see it. I'm not going to see it until I come back from holiday, so no point putting it in the chat line. But by all means, pastor@essexgospel.com. I'd be happy to converse with you. I'm going to give Hannah an opportunity to do a late edit here. It's not brought to you by Coke this week. It's Natural Cabana Lemonade.
Enough talk. Let's go with the chug.
But it's not bad. It's not bad. It'd be better on ice, I think. Pretty good stuff. Natural Cabana. Sunshine and happiness, just like Pastor Brent. So let me just tell you right now, we've got to the end of chapter 3. I think I am going to hit pause. We're not going to jump into chapter 4 just yet. We won't get to that controversial verse in verse 6 just yet, but I will connect the dots. We'll see you when I get back. Have a great time. In the meantime, bye-bye for now.